All right, y'all, welcome to the show. We are back from Austin, Texas, and I'm excited for today's show, man. We also have the State of the Union is happening live tomorrow. We're going to do a live stream of it. There's going to be some stuff before, some stuff after. It's going to be a good time, man. It's going to be me, and then I'll be joined by the Breaking Points crew, and it'll be. I'm really looking forward to that. There's a lot to say about the State of the Union, and we already know what Biden's strategy is going to be. It is not a good strategy. But we'll be fair, listen to the speech, give our real-time reaction, and so we have that to look forward to. Now, today, Biden is already, keep it real. Some people would fight with this word, but I think it's genuine to use it. Biden's already rigging the 2024 primary. I mean, if you want to soft pedal it a little more, you say, hey, the DNC is putting their thumb on the scale for Biden, but, we know what they're doing. We know why they're doing it. And so I'm kind of comfortable using the word rigged. So we're going to talk about that in just a second. Of course, we'll get into the Chinese spy balloon. We shot it down, and now China is reacting to that. And we have Trump and the Republicans, the peanut gallery weighing in. Later on in the show, we have the House passed an anti-socialism virtue signal bill. I mean, this is the sort of stuff you can expect now going forward, right? With the Republicans in control of the House. This is all like goofy stuff, man. None of this is serious. It's just literally just a virtue signal bill. And then Donald Trump is putting Republicans on notice like, hey, man, I'll ruin the whole thing y'all got going. I will absolutely wreck it. I will destroy it. So don't mess with me. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into it here. So Mediaite has a video here from CNN. They're going to talk about the DNC released their new schedule. So they changed the order of the primaries and caucuses. Now, for the longest time, New Hampshire has been the first primary on the schedule, and it's a historic position. They're very proud of that fact. Well, in step the DNC, in step Joe Biden. They got some issues with the way the primary schedule was. Why? Well, very simply, Joe Biden got his ass handed to him on a silver platter in the first, how many contests was it? 3, 4? I mean, he was like, homeboy was all the way down in like 5th place. And then it took all the way until South Carolina for him to get a little, injection of adrenaline for him to sort of get to first place. He went from like Nowheresville to, in one election cycle, crushing victory to, okay, now he's kind of the favorite. And also there was help by Mayor Pete and Amy Klobuchar and Beto O'Rourke. They all dropped out at the same time. They all threw their support behind him, and that helped him get to that position. But here we have a clip from CNN. They're going to be discussing the primary calendar change, and then I'll tell you why they're doing all of this. So let's listen.
And Arlette, the DNC is also expected to vote tomorrow on the Democratic Party's primary calendar for 2024. What's that going to look like?
Well, Jake, Democrats tomorrow are expected to give the green light to a new primary calendar that really upends the way that Democrats are nominating their presidential nominees. They're removing Iowa from that very first position and replacing it with South Carolina, a state that essentially delivered the presidential nomination to President Biden back in 2020. It would then be followed by Nevada, New Hampshire, as well as Georgia and Michigan. But just because Democrats give this the green light and okay, there are still some logistical hurdles that need to be cleared, particularly when it comes to the states of Georgia and New Hampshire, which have their primary dates set on the state level. And New Hampshire, which has been very resistant to these changes, today the state's chair, Ray Buckley, said that they've been put in a, quote, an impossible no-win position. But bottom line here, President Biden has been trying to make the case that voters of color need to have representation early on in the nominating process, and that is what he is hoping this change in the primary calendar will do.
Now, understand something. The point that she's making is a lie. That's a lie. That's their cover story. Their cover story is, who, us, bro? We just care a lot about, like, voters of color and people of color. That's why we're doing this, because we're like deeply not racist, and anybody who's against this, well, maybe they are a little bit, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's their cover story. The reality is South Carolina was a big win for Biden in the last election, and so they're like, Okay, where should we go first to give us a colossal advantage? I know. Let's go to the place where we crushed them. If you had a situation where Biden won overwhelmingly a super duper white state, he'd have no problem putting that white state first. So the thing that annoys me is like the bastardization of identity politics here. The cover story. Everybody knows, I mean, anybody who understands the first thing about politics knows that this is BS. Now, the other issue is South Carolina is going to go to the Republicans in the general election, without a doubt. Now, New Hampshire is a swing state. Could go Democratic, could go Republican. And so what you're doing is you're making it much more likely that New Hampshire goes to the Republicans in the general election. You're sacrificing a state, albeit a small one, but you're sacrificing a state just to give yourself an advantage in the primary. So even this idea of like, well, we got to put voters of color first. Well, why wouldn't you put voters of color in a state that is a Democratic state or a swing state? You're going to put voters of color first from a deep red state that has no chance of going Democratic. So you're pissing off everybody in that early part of the calendar because you're shuffling them around, and they don't want to be shuffled around. I mean, maybe South Carolina is going to be happy because they're first and they get to have that badge of honor, but Democrats are not going to win it in the general, and all the other states are like, hey, man, we see what you're doing. We know how cynical this is. Now, shame on CNN. Again, this is the problem with CNN. This is the problem with mainstream media. They're just stenographers to the powerful. So the Democrats and the DNC tell them, the reason we're doing this is because we care about voters of color. And then what do they say? They're doing this because they want voters of color to have a stronger voice in the process. And nobody points out the obvious. This has nothing to do with that. The reason they're doing it is Biden won South Carolina easily. And so they want to rig the 2024 primary. They want to get him off to a hot start to make him winning seem inevitable. Okay, let's continue here because this gets really interesting.
Arlette Saenz, thanks so much. Let's discuss, Leanne, if people think that it's cold in New Hampshire right now, wait until Joe Biden goes there after he's gotten rid of them as the first in the nation primary. Listen to one of Biden's delegates from 2020, Steve Shirtleff, talking about this new proposal.
I'll look for another candidate before I'd support Joe Biden if you should go so far as to take away the first of the nation primary from the greatest state.
That's a Biden delegate.
Well, the two New Hampshire senators didn't go to a party at the White House because they were so mad at President Biden about this. People from New Hampshire, politicos, are saying that it is going to jeopardize him winning the general election in 2024, should he run again. Of course, he hasn't announced he's going to run again yet. But New Hampshire is taking this very, very personally. And
I should say, like, these victories in New Hampshire, for folks who aren't nerds like the rest of us, are always pretty thin. They're pretty close. Like the presidential ones, I mean. Like nobody wins a landslide victory in New Hampshire. If the Democrat wins, and they have in the last few elections, it's by 2-3 percentage points.
So do you understand what's happening here? Now, listen, I don't want to overstate it, but I also don't want to understate it. This is one of those things where the door is wide open now. New Hampshire is actively shopping for another candidate because they feel deeply snubbed by Biden. Now, hey, you can make the point, should all this politicking really matter? Shouldn't people care first and foremost about the policy substance, and shouldn't they be reasonable and put this stuff aside? I think that's a fair argument, right? But that's just not how people function. That's not how people work. And so all of these New Hampshire Democratic Party officials, people who are good little Democrats, are looking around going, if you snub us like this, we're going to snub you. And so we're looking at a situation where anybody who primaries Biden could pick up the state of New Hampshire. That's what we're looking at. And, a candidate who comes out of nowhere to primary a sitting president, winning any state at all, is a huge story. And then you create a narrative, and then you create momentum, and then we're off to the races. So, look, I mean, I don't want to put people's hopes up too much or anything, but I will say, Marianne Williamson's been visiting New Hampshire quite a bit. Talking to people, meeting with people, giving speeches, letting them know, hey, man, I support you guys. I'm with you guys. I don't agree with the changes in the schedule. I'm just saying. And there's some new polls that came out. Crystal was telling me about them yesterday. And the numbers were so astonishing. I I actually laughed for a solid 30 seconds when she told me. Something like 6% of the country is enthusiastic about another Trump versus Biden rematch. Now, by the way, that is where the smart money is, right? Like, that's the most likely scenario as of right now as I talk to you guys, a Trump versus Biden rematch. 6% of the country is enthusiastic about that. When you ask Democratic voters if they're enthusiastic about a second term of Biden, you know what that number is? 16 or 17%. These are historically low numbers. Over 60% of Democrats say, we want somebody else. We want somebody else. That's it. It's over. It's done. Let's move along here. And so, look, I'm telling you, things are coming together in a weird way. This is Democrats getting too high on their own farts and thinking there's no consequences for their actions. And so this little, shimmy, this little shuffle in the primary calendar, they think nothing of it. They think like this is just what we do. We rig stuff in our favor. But the voters are taking note. And they are not happy in the slightest. So the door just swung wide open. And I would say that Marianne Williamson, if she decides to run, is now certainly placed well to win, flat out win New Hampshire. And if she doesn't win New Hampshire, you're still talking about 40% of the vote, something crazy, right? Because it's probably going to be just Biden and Marianne. And so we see the dirty tricks you're onto. And look, again, I don't want to overstate it, but this is why people hate politics. You're clearly changing the calendar because you feel like I will have an advantage if I go to the state that I won by a big margin. That's why you're doing it. But then you cloak it in, oh, we're so virtuous and not racist, and that's why we're doing it, because we love people of color, and if you disagree with this change, maybe you don't. It's like, Jesus Christ, man. There's not a honest word in that argument. So there you have it. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.